So, about a week ago now, I was looking through my grandma's old curtain stash and I managed to find these curtains right here. No, not these ones, these ones. So, with that being said, I decided to ask my Instagram followers whether I should A, make a Renaissance inspired costume, or B, make a jacket based off of all my previous jackets that I've made in the past. And insert clip of my Instagram story. Hi everyone. So I cut up my grandma's old curtains and I wanted to know, do you guys want to see a Renaissance inspired outfit with this? Like the things that like Shakespeare wore or just a normal bomber jacket? FYI, I'm out of zippers. So please pick Renaissance. And here were the results. Yeah. It seems as though as everyone was busy that day, doing whatever it is busy people do while in quarantine, which is practically nothing. So, after a couple hours of questioning all my friendships that I still have prior to graduating from high school, I started the initial sketch for the costume that I wanted to make. Now, I do want to emphasize that I took a lot of inspiration from Disney's Enchanted, specifically from the character of Prince Edward. Now, one of the key elements and one of the more striking elements from Prince Edward's costume from the movie are those really big puff sleeves. I have obviously messed with puff sleeves in the past, and they're actually my favorite type of sleeves to make, but I have never made puff sleeves to the extent of Prince Edward's from the movie. I also went online and I simply Googled men's Renaissance costumes, and I found a specific photo, which I'm not going to put up because I don't think I have rights to it since it's a painting. But the specific costume that I took inspiration from, which you can kind of see in the background over there, it has a lot of orange and gold, and that's basically the color scheme of the outfit that I'm trying to make. So I took a lot of inspiration from that. I also decided I wanted to make a muffin hat because I like to torture myself, but I've never made a muffin hat in my life, nor have I ever made a hat in my life. The closest thing I've made to a headpiece are like headbands and stuff like that, but I've never made a hat. So, I mean, I thought to myself, why not torture myself furthermore with this costume and try to make a muffin hat? I also thought to myself that adding a muffin hat to the costume will not only enhance the costume furthermore, but will make the costume more prince-like. I know the prince from Snow White in the beginning of the movie had a muffin hat or something similar to that, and I also had some leftover feathers from a cosplay I did a long time ago, which I ended up not reusing again, so I just wanted to use it for this costume that I'm making right now. And after a lot of erasing and unnecessary labeling, here is the finished sketch. Well, now that the sketch is done, it's actually time to get started on the actual project. But before I actually started on the actual project, I needed to go buy some fabrics. So, to Walmart. And I forgot that everyone practically sews these days because of the whole pandemic going on. So, lo and behold, the cotton fabric section was very much deserted. But that didn't matter because at least they didn't touch my silk fabrics. So, we're good here. I love going to the fabric section. I always see fabrics that I want to buy, and I end up using it for a costume that I'll only wear once in my life. I have a problem. So I was originally going to go to Walmart first and then go to Joann's right after, but because of the whole virus thing, stores close earlier, and Joann's unfortunately is one of those stores. They close at around I think 3:30 or something like that in the afternoon. So we ended up not being able to go to Joann's on that day. I also got a tad bit distracted. So we ended up going to Joann's the next day, and if you're like me and you're really starting to miss those long Disneyland lines, well, aside from Costco, Joann's offers the same experience for you, minus the queues and maybe the kids. So here are a couple things that I got from Joann's. I got this cool ribbon that I thought I would use on the costume. I also got some thread and the two fabrics that I needed for the cape. I don't know why I took this clip, but enjoy. I also got some Disney fabrics at Joann's. They were 50% off, so I only got them for like $9 a yard. If you guys want a mask tutorial, uh, comment, I guess. So now that I finally have all my fabrics, it is actually time to start on the costume. Now, here's a clip of me trying to basically try to see how I can make the bodice piece. Is that even called a bodice for men's, or is it just like the upper piece of the shirt? It's a shirt. Yeah, I'm making the shirt right now. So after realizing that I am only a large, I took those two fabrics and I put them on top of each other like this. I also do want to apologize for what I'm wearing in this clip. You're going to see this a lot, but I'm at home. I don't care how I look. And I mean, I went to the store wearing the top layers of my outfit, but I came home and changed into some pajamas to make myself more comfortable. So yeah, sorry. Now, as you can see, I'm using an old long sleeve as a pattern. You can be professional and make a pattern using paper or whatever you want to use, but I get lazy and I don't want to make patterns. And this ends up working out for me anyways, so I mean, yeah, just reuse your old clothes as patterns, I guess. Now, remember to always add seam allowance to what you're making. Remember, it's always better to have something bigger than smaller, because once something's small, you really can't go back unless you fix it somehow, but that's more work on your behalf. But with something bigger, you can always take it in the future if needed. Now, I have to say, I was really scared when doing this project because I only have a little bit of that fabric right there that I have, not the silk, but my main fabric. Because they were originally curtains, I had a small amount of it, and I was really scared that I wouldn't have enough to make this costume. But I mean, we'll see in the end how it turned out. So in this clip right here, I am taking the top half of my costume, which is the part that's going to show, and I am putting it on top of my lining fabric. For my lining fabric, I ended up choosing brown silk. I find silk to be the easiest to use for lining fabric, and it's also the cheapest fabric that I could purchase. At first, silk may seem hard to work with because it frays a lot, but I have a lot of experience with it by now, so it's pretty easy to work with. So after putting it on top, I just pin it down and cut out the general shape of my previous pattern. Now for the next step, I took a rough measurement of my neck. I think my neck ended up being about 7 inches to where I wanted to cut it, but I ended up limiting it all the way down to 5 because I've had projects before where I've cut the neck hole a tad bit too big and it ended up failing. And obviously, with this certain costume, I can't afford to do that. So, with this specific step, forget the whole bigger is better thing. Start small and just gradually cut if you need to in the future. So for the next step, you're going to flip your fabrics to where the bad sides are facing up and then the good sides are facing one another. After that, you are going to pin them down, but remember to always leave an opening so that you can flip them inside out. So after pinning down both of your front and back panels, you are going to simply take it to your sewing machine and do a straight stitch all around, remembering to leave that hole open so that you can flip it inside out. And after sewing and flipping your panels inside out, you should have something like this. Now, this next step is totally optional, but what I did was I basically pinned all around the panels and did a straight stitch all around to basically help flatten the fabric more. You can either choose to iron or do this step, but I'm actually going to choose to do both of those just to ensure that the fabric and the costume has a nice formation. And if you ended up doing this optional step, you should end up with something like this. So when it came time to actually ironing down the panels, I was really scared because I thought the iron would burn the curtain fabric. So what I did was I cut out a small piece of the curtain fabric and I put my iron on the highest level and I ironed it down. Lo and behold, it didn't do anything negative to the fabric itself, so I proceeded with ironing down the panels. So after I ironed both of the front and the back panels, I pinned them together and I tried to fit it around my head, but it didn't quite work out the way I wanted it to. So after some slight tweaking and a little bit of repinning, I was able to finally fit it through my head. And if you guys were curious about how I ended up fixing that simple neck problem, here is a quick clip of how I ended up fixing it. And after pinning that down, I took it to my sewing machine and sewed both the front and the back halves together to form this. So the next step was to make the sleeves. So in making these sleeves, because they are puff sleeves, you have to make them a lot bigger than you would normally make sleeves. So I think initially from shoulder all the way down, I think this was around 25 inches, if not bigger. I measured all the way from the top of my shoulder all the way down to my elbow and cut out the pattern piece. And after mimicking that same pattern for your other sleeve, you should have something like this. And after cutting out the puff sleeves, I made the bottom portion of the sleeves. And here is a clip of me ironing down the sleeves before pinning and sewing them down. And after sewing and flipping them inside out, this is what you should have. Next, I cut out strips of fabric roughly around 17 inches long and 4 inches wide, pinned them on my satin fabric, sewed them down on my sewing machine, cut them out into rectangles again, and then finally I flipped them inside out, ending up with a total of 6 individual strips. And now it is time to set your sewing machine to the number 4 setting because we are about to sew down the puff sleeves. So, for anyone who doesn't know, the reason why you want to set your sewing machine to the number 4 setting or anything beyond that is because in order to actually make the ruffles for the puff sleeves, we need to have it on the highest setting so you can be able to pull it and make the ruffles. And here is a clip of me pulling the fabric together in order to create those ruffles so that I can actually fit it onto the sleeves that I made for the bottom portion. It takes a little while to actually get it right, but when I finally did get it right, I wedged those strips in between the two fabrics and pinned them together. After pinning it down, I simply went back to my sewing machine, changed it back to its previous setting, which was the number 3 setting, and simply did a straight stitch across where I pinned. And after repeating the same process you did to the previous sleeve, you should have two identical sleeves that look like this. So since the strips had a tendency to fray a lot, I decided to pin them down simply by trimming them and then folding them down 2 times and doing a simple zigzag stitch across to prevent them from fraying and to also clean up the edge a little bit more. And then after that, I went back to my sewing machine, set it back to the number 4 setting, and then did a quick straight stitch on the top of the sleeve, and then gathered it up to create the ruffles. So after I gathered the ruffles, I simply pinned them where the sleeve should be, making sure to wedge all 3 of those rectangles in between the bodice portion of your outfit and also your sleeves, and then I simply sewed them down. And after sewing the sleeves to the shirt, this is how the costume should roughly look like. And here is a quick clip of me trying out the costume. I usually like to try out the costumes that I make in the middle of doing them just to kind of see if it's up to par to my expectations because I do have OCD. And the last thing that I would want to do is to restart and dethread because those are like 2 of my worst nightmares, and I try not to have that happen. So I finally decided to use that gold ribbon. I don't know if it's really a ribbon or it's more of a lace. I don't know what it is, but it kind of looks like rope. I guess it's just rope. But I decided to take the rope that I got from Joann's and basically use it as a cool design all over my costume. I basically tried to sew it down, but ended up finding out that I can't sew it down because it's big and bulky. So I ended up hand stitching it, which is also one of my worst nightmares. I ended up sewing this ribbon detail around the collar of the costume and also where the sleeves meet the puff sleeves. So basically in the middle of where they meet, I also ended up sewing it there. This took me about around an hour and 30 minutes to stitch down. I'm really bad at hand stitching and I always seem to mess up. So it's not really my best trait, but I try and I think I did a pretty good job of seamlessly stitching it down. So I mean, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. So at this part of the tutorial, this is basically where I mark down with chalk where I need to trim things down. I do want to state that whenever I work on a costume or an outfit, I do like to elongate parts such as the sleeves and also the bodice piece. I just find it very easy to just elongate those pieces rather than to cut them to the exact length that I need them to be at. I'm not good at math and I'm also not good at like proportions and all that, so it's better for me to just make them longer and then just to trim them down when I need to. So after trimming those pieces down, I hemmed them to prevent further fraying. I also decided to add a little bit of lace to the bottom of the sleeves. I just simply felt like the sleeves were a little too bland and I had this laying around, so why not? I actually bought this lace a long time ago. I think I originally needed it to make doll petticoats, but it was a little too thick to make doll petticoats out of, so I ended up getting a new lace for that. But I actually forgot this existed, and when I was looking through my lace drawer, I found it, and I just thought to myself, why not use it for this costume? So it has a purpose at least. And this is how it ended up looking on the bottom of the sleeves. So one of the last things that I did before moving on was I hemmed down the bottom and also closed up the side seams. And now it was time to get started on that muffin hat. So I took my tape measure and wrapped it all around my head, getting a total of 22 inches. But just to be on the safe side, I ended up using 25 inches instead of 22. And the first thing that I did was I grabbed my tape measure and then measured out on a scrap piece of fabric a strip that was 6 inches tall and 27 inches long. And after cutting that out, I basically mimicked the same process that I did to these strips on my puff sleeves. So for the next step, I took a scrap piece of fabric and then I folded it multiple times like what you are seeing in this clip right here. And depending on how many times you fold it, whether that would be 1, 2, or 3 or more, that basically determines how big your future circle that you will get eventually when you cut it out will be. And then I mimic that same process by cutting out a square out of the silk fabric, folding it into a square and then taking the previous pattern I made and then just simply cutting out another circle that's the same size as the previous circle I made. And then after sewing that down and flipping it inside out, I basically took the strip of fabric, wedged it onto the circle, and then made pleats all around it, and then just simply stitched all around to get the basic shape of the muffin hat. I have to be quite honest with you guys, I actually didn't know how to structure this hat originally. I actually ended up searching up on YouTube how to make a doll hat, and I followed those steps but made it into a human-sized hat instead of a doll-sized hat. And here are the feathers that I was talking about earlier in the video. These are obviously fake feathers. I don't support animal cruelty, but I took a large feather and then a medium feather, and I practically just wedged it in between the seams that I made on the hat. I also found this spare gold button in my arts and crafts drawer, and I wasn't using it anymore, so I decided to use it on the hat. I decided to sew it down underneath the feathers, just to add a little bit more flair, and I also took that same rope that I used for the top of the outfit, and I decided to put it all around the hat just for a little bit more detail. And this is how it ended up looking at the end. I actually didn't get a clip of me sewing down the button underneath the feathers, but that doesn't really matter because you'll see it in the end. But this is how the ribbon looks on the hat at least. And with the hat out of the way, it was actually now time to work on the cape. But for some reason, I kept on procrastinating on making the cape. I don't know why capes are like my favorite thing to do, but I procrastinated and I decided to make a collar for my dog out of the scrap pieces of fabric that I was about to throw away. I don't know why I did this. I don't know. And after procrastinating for a couple hours more and randomly rewatching the first two seasons of Monster High, I ended up finally starting the cape. And as Edna Mode might say, no capes. And well, she really can't tell me what to do, even though I love Edna Mode and she's like one of my biggest inspirations. She can't tell me what to do because she doesn't exist. I originally wanted a long cape for this costume, but I didn't have enough fabric, nor do I think a prince would necessarily go into battle with a long cape. So I ended up settling for a small shoulder cape. So what I did was I ended up cutting a circle out of that maroon fabric and then a circle out of that white fabric and then ended up with two identical circles like this. Then I opened the circles up, cut a straight line down the middle, folded it back in half, and then cut a straight line across the top. Next, I sew those two circles together, leaving the top open so I can flip the cape inside out. So the last thing that I needed to do was to make the collar piece of my cape. So what I did was I took my tape measure and then measured out how big the opening was on the top of the cape. And then I cut a big rectangle. I believe the measurement was 26 inches, but I ended up going to 29 inches just to make everything a little bit safer because I could always take it in. And then I took that big rectangle and then folded it into a smaller rectangle and then cut a sort of slanted triangle on both sides just to kind of create that collar look. And because the whole cape has a two-toned look to it, I also needed to cut out that same collar shape but on my white fabric. So after cutting the same shape, what I did was I took it to my sewing machine, sewed it down, remembering to leave the bottom portion of the collar open so you can flip it inside out. And then after flipping inside out, I simply took the collar and then attached it to my cape. And this is how the cape ended up looking at the end. And now for the grand reveal.